And welcome to the November meeting of Florida Veterans for Common Sense. Welcome, Representative Anna Eskamani. And Anna's in a tough position because she's in a minority party and a supermajority legislature. And with the governor that we have, it's almost impossible to have a voice. But Anna Eskamani manages to do that. And we're really proud of what she's able to do. And Anna, if you could please tell us what's going on in Tallahassee and what can be done about it to make things better.
Well, I'd love to. And just thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to join y'all again. I am actually here in Tallahassee at my Airbnb for what is another week of committee meetings. I just came home on Thursday and then came back this weekend. So we are incredibly busy, and unfortunately, a lot of bad bills are being filed as I speak. In fact, tomorrow is a bill filing deadline for some members. So we're seeing a lot of bad bills get dropped in the last 24 hours, and I'm sure more will come. And before I dive into what's happening legislature, I just want to say thank you for having me. And thank you, of course, all of our veterans. I know we just had a beautiful and powerful Veterans Day weekend. We were at the Orlando Veterans Day Parade on Saturday, and back-to-back events on Friday. And I'm proud to serve on the Orlando Mayor's Veterans Advisory Board, where we help to focus on issues like housing, access to mental health resources, and so forth for the veterans community in Central Florida. And so I'm just so grateful that y'all have this organization where you're uplifting common sense policies to make life better for people. I know that right now, top of mind for me are issues like property insurance, the rising cost of rent, food insecurity, and other real life challenges that our constituents face. But of course, as you have probably seen the headlines, the legislature is too busy focused on culture wars and the governor pretending to play president to handle some of these real life problems. So I want to provide some quick context to who I am, as I know there's probably some new people in the room who may not know who I am. And then we'll dive into what's happening in Tallahassee. And then I want to hear what your questions are as well. So real quick, it was mentioned in my bio that I'm representing District 42, which is parts of Orlando. Actually, I have the city of Orlando in my district. I go all the way down to Belle Isle, Pine Castle, Edgewood, and then up to Winter Park, Maitland, and the historic town of Eatonville. I come from very humble beginnings. In fact, I never thought I would run for office. It was not something I grew up thinking about. My journey into advocacy started from very humble beginnings. I was a daughter of working class immigrants. My parents came from different parts of Iran, but met each other working at the same donut shop in Orlando. And my dad was actually really shy to tell people his cultural origin for fear of discrimination or prejudice. My mom, in contrast, was very proud of her cultural identity, and she recognized my dad had an accent. And so she asked him where home was for him. They started speaking Persian. The rest was history. With that said, Orlando was made our home. I have a twin sister, Ida, and a big brother named Arya. And we did everything we could to achieve the American dream that my parents had sacrificed so much for us. All I knew growing up was hard work. In fact, my parents worked multiple jobs to pay the bills on time. My dad became an engineer, going to the University of Central Florida while raising 3 kids on the weekdays. And then on the weekends, he worked as a customer service representative at Walt Disney World just to make ends meet. My mom had an accounting degree from Iran she could not use. She worked at fast food restaurants, eventually at Kmart. And that unfortunately was her last job because in 2004, she passed away after a long fight with cancer. And I share that because my mom is a big reason why I am who I am today. And it's a motivation for what I do. In fact, she was one of the most selfless people you would ever meet. She was able to give so much, even with so little. And it's that type of community service, that type of big-hearted giving, selflessness that I try to replicate in my life. And it's what drew me to advocacy. In fact, my very first attempt at trying to push for political change is when I was 10 years old, and I was collecting petitions in my classroom to keep my best friend at the time from being moved to a different lunch period. Did not win that campaign, unfortunately, but I never stopped me from organizing around issues that I cared about. And in fact, when I got to high school, my senior year, I had an amazing AP government teacher in my public school that helped me understand just my voice and why it's important, especially for young people, for working class people, for folks of different backgrounds to come together around common causes and to exercise our right to vote. And when I got to the University of Central Florida myself, I knew I wanted to be involved in advocacy. And so I started volunteering with different issues, ranging from the environmental rights movement to human rights advocacy. And eventually I met the College Democrats at UCF. And I'll be very candid with y'all because I know it's a space of diverse political affiliation. I was registered first to be no party affiliation, and I never really thought of picking a party. The only reason why I fell into the Democratic Party was because I was so inspired by my fellow students who were talking about issues that impacted me in my life. And I felt really motivated to get more involved. So that really was the beginning of my political origin story at the University of Central Florida. And I would eventually work at Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida for 6 years, advocating for reproductive rights, helping to ensure that people can make their own medical, personal decisions about their bodies. And my exposure to legislature was a part of that. I would walk the halls of Tallahassee to connect our patient advocates to their lawmakers. And now I walk into the chamber doing that same type of work. My decision to run for office was not an easy one. I had a really difficult acceptance of the risk of losing. I was so scared of losing. I mean, it's one of the realities of running for office, right? Is you put your name out there and they might not accept it. So I had to really build this courage. And a part of what I did was I wrote what I would say if I lost, as not just an exercise to kind of get over the fear of losing, but I also wanted to outline the victories even in loss, because there's so much that we learn about ourselves, about our communities, and people that we positively impact when we take risk, when we do something that we feel is right. And that was my foundation to say, okay, now that I know what it feels like, to potentially lose, I can focus on winning. And sure enough, we flipped my seat from red to blue in 2018. And I've won 3 elections in total so far, approaching my last election, as we do have term limits in Florida. So I only have one more election left in 2024. So that brings me to the legislature. And it has been a very difficult 5 years in office, because I want to focus on solving problems, which I do see as bipartisan. I think that many of us have the same desires in life. We just want to be healthy, safe, and secure. We want to support our loved ones. We want to have a good paying job. We want to retire in a state that we could do so comfortably with clean air and clean water. And yet some of these basic necessities are just not being met. And instead, we have a state legislature that is not only distracted by culture wars, but to be candid, a lot of bills that move through the process are pushed by big lobbyists. In fact, there was a bill filed today that would criminalize anyone who sells alternative meat products. These are known as cultivated meat. These are meat products that are grown in laboratory with cells of animals. And it's been a new technology being explored. A lot of unanswered questions about it, but at the same time, not something we should criminalize in the state of Florida. And yet that bill was literally filed today. Despite climate change being real, legislation was filed today to preempt local governments from setting their own standards around heat protection legislation. So, for example, we have seen policy in the past to help ensure that farm workers are allowed to take breaks because it's just so hot outside that farm workers can develop kidney disease and even die out in the fields while picking our fruits and vegetables. Legislation was just filed to preempt, basically stop any efforts by local governments to have those type of policies be put into place. We have a bill filed to eliminate child labor laws in Florida, to weaken child labor laws. And meanwhile, when it comes to these housing affordability issues, they are ignored. So I want to step back and open up the space. I'm sure there's a lot on people's minds, but just thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing, what is a focus and importance to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. The first thing that I'll start out with, our group, we really believe that America is an aspirational country, and we want to move forward And we're seeing time and time again that our legislators are trying to move us backwards with not taking care of our rivers, not taking care of our bays and estuaries, not fighting climate change. We feel that we have the potential in this country to really lead the world in having the highest and most prosperous standard of living. But it seems like big business and others are determined to hold us back. And so the question is, what is the best way to combat that negative attitude? I mean, we start out with just the very idea of MAGA. Go back to something when America was great. Well, we're in the legacy of Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine taught us to always aspire to be better, reach for the promise of America. And it seems like MAGA's given up on that. So how do we address that problem?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a great question. I mean, the polarization of today's politics it's just reached a new threshold. And of course, it wasn't that long ago where our state capitol was under attack, and there was an effort to essentially usurp our democracy in this great nation. It reminds me of how young and fragile the United States of America really is. I mean, I have no doubt this is the greatest country in the world. I am so grateful that my parents immigrated to make this country their home. And with that, I feel like each one of us need to play a role in this incredible experiment called America to make it better, to make it stronger, to make it more resilient. The fact that we almost lost our democracy not that long ago tells me that our nation is in need of leaders, a multi-generational leaders, folks that are committed to finding areas of commonality to protect our planet and to protect our country. So how do we regain that? Because I do think that's a part of our origin story. The fact that we had, founding fathers come together to craft, what would be the freest country in the world, is no small feat. And it is something to be incredibly proud of. And yet here we are, almost 250 years later, navigating with this, I don't even want to call it a movement because it gives it too much credit, but with this insidious, toxic, and corrosive effort called MAGA, right? To essentially bring us back in time and to, of course, allow for there to be distraction, deflection, and division over unity, over problem solving. I think one way we combat it is by meeting folks where they're at. I mentioned that I flipped my seat in 2018. That was a very serious race for me. My opponent spent more than $500,000 attacking me, and I had to be able to kind of cut through that noise and to really focus on my values and to show folks that I'm going to fight for you. I'm not going to fight for the corporation. I'm not going to lead you down an extreme path. I'm going to focus on what's best interest of Central Florida and what our constituents need. And that also translates to leading with your values, because I do think that when we first lead with issues, sometimes we lose people. But if we lead with our values, we can build relationships with folks that maybe at first glance, they wouldn't support someone like me. But once they hear my personal story, they hear that I care about family, I care about individual freedom, I care about collective empowerment. These are values that I feel like are very American. But at first glance, because I have a D next to my name, right, folks might not think that. So we have to lead with our values to kind of separate ourselves from stereotypes and from party titles and from, unfortunately, what has become a really polarized political environment. So that also means that I need to be willing to listen versus always be immediately right. I say immediately right because I usually, have a good instinct, and I'm not going to know the answer to every problem, but I know I can get there with conversation, with dialogue, with research, with experts. But it shouldn't be about me getting to that answer quickly and making an assumption about what you need. We need to be better at listening to one another, meeting folks where they're at, belly to belly. A big part of my political work is door knocking. We go door to door and we talk to folks and we ask you, what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? And those fears can tell a lot about a person. When someone tells me they're afraid of medical bills, that is such a real life fear that many of us share that we can also immediately help address through policy. But they tell me they're afraid of, immigrants, or they're afraid of the safety of because of the diversity of a region. That's a much more complex question, and I should not respond back in a standoffish way. I should respond back with wonder and say, well, why do you feel that way? Tell me more, right? And if you're willing to take the time to have that conversation, to have an open-ended question, to kind of lead with wonder, then I think we would find out that person really isn't afraid of immigrants. There's something else that they're not addressing. And if we take the elevator down a little bit, we can figure it out. So I think it's really important that we're not going to match that same level of vitriol with vitriol. If we're actually going to try to build a bigger we, if you will, it does require listening, it requires dialoguing, and it requires conflict resolution in a way that politics has never really allowed and has never really facilitated. So we have to kind of go above the fray a little bit to create those conversations. And I do think that our veterans are very well equipped to do this, because when you're serving our country, you don't get to choose your coworkers, right? I don't get to choose my coworkers. When I get to the Florida House, I have 119 colleagues. I didn't choose them. They were chosen by their constituents. And these are the folks I must work with, regardless of where the political dynamics are, right? And I think veterans can really relate to that, because you're going to be serving, bed to bed, shoulder to shoulder with folks of all different political backgrounds. And yet you have the same mission, the same purpose, the same cause. If we can lead with that same commitment to American democracy and put aside the desire to always be right and to be fast about being right, I think we can combat the fervor that is MAGA. But it just takes time. It really takes time. And I worry, because I feel like in politics, we expect expediency. We want things to happen fast. But nothing in this country has really moved that fast. I mean, almost every civil rights movement took time. And we're still in the middle of civil rights movements. I mean, we haven't ended, any of these civil rights movements. They're still a work in progress, just like this country is. So we have to also embrace the notion that combating extremism and de-radicalizing people, there's no quick fix for that. But a part of it is having conversations, rebuilding trust, leading by example. And I think if we do that, then we would be surprised of our own abilities to find that common ground.
That's certainly a wonderful answer. I'm going to get in a little bit in the weeds, if I could. We have a problem as veterans, because most veterans that need benefits through the VA, they apply for those benefits through a VA service officer or someone that's accredited by VA to apply for those benefits. And we've had a problem in the country, and we have the problem in Florida of there's really some outfits that are scamming veterans, applying for benefits, and then they're taking a large hunk of whatever benefit the veteran gets. And the problem with this is, here's where the problem came in. This was a crime, but a few sessions ago, Congress changed the law, so it's no longer a crime. It's just something that's civilly forbidden. And so what's happening, these scam outfits are exploiting veterans, and the VA knows about it, but all they can do is send them a cease and desist letter, which
Wow.
And I just wonder if there's a possibility that we could get a law in Florida so that we could clamp down on these fly-by-night operators. And I'm not sure, but I believe there's other states that have been able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for uplifting that. I know that, unfortunately, when it comes to all of our benefit programs, but especially for veterans, we have seen, I think we often call them pension poachers, who try to sell fake financial products or charge a fee to restructure your assets, or, like you said, may very well just totally steal all your benefits completely. And so those scams are unfortunately all too common, and especially in Florida, where identity theft is very, very frequent and impacting, especially our seniors here in the Sunshine State. So I actually think there definitely can be some potential criminal penalties established in state law for scamming veterans. And I will definitely revisit the statute to see if something already exists. And I'm sure there could be the potential for helping to ensure that at a state level, if that is detected, if there is fraud or scamming of VA benefits, that there could be a state process for accountability. And I will double check other state policies as well. I also wonder, if Congress can restore that, because obviously, states can help step up in their enforcement. But that sounds like a terrible weakening of VA protections for what really can be a vulnerable population of people if you don't have those structures in place to prevent fraud.
Well, that's exactly right, because some of the veterans are really not capable of taking care of themselves like they should through no fault of their own. So they need help. And so it'd be very appreciated if you could look into that. And I hope it's not too late if you find there's a issue here that can be corrected. If it's not too late this legislative session, it may be with committee hearings already underway. But if it's not, that might be a good bill to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll add it to our list, see what we can do.
Okay, do we have questions from the floor or comments? Yes, Philippe, come up to the microphone, please, sir.
Is that half the country doesn't see the information that the other half sees. And vice versa. But that's particularly a problem on the MAGA side. These people just don't get the facts, the most basic facts. How can we possibly find some channel that gets them to learn what is being done with infrastructure, with the unions making serious gains, et cetera, down the road?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, so much of the battles we have in politics today are information wars. And I do think the far right has been much more effective in communicating their positions, their misinformation more than anyone else. In fact, I pulled over at a truck stop diner last week when I was coming home from Tallahassee. And, I walked in and Fox News is on, right, at this diner, right off I-10. And it's just 24/7, right? Propaganda just being shared to folks with no question, no doubt of what's being spoon-fed, to that audience. So combating that is not easy, but I think there's a few tactics to consider. One is that we really need to identify more spokespeople that can appeal to folks who, identify with the MAGA base, right? And those spokespeople, they do exist. I mean, there are some, for example, podcasts out there that they can attract a diverse audience, but their political persuasion is more liberal or more maybe in the middle. So they can talk the same type of verbiage, if you will, but appeal to folks who maybe have a very specific cultural background, economic background. At the end of the day, something the right is very good at is they brand their opposition as being illegitimate, whether it's because they are elite under their eyes, or they are a Democrat, right? They're very good at branding people so that those within the MAGA community all automatically don't listen to you, right? Automatically assume like you're not legitimate. I don't have to even look at you or listen to you because you have been branded as someone who is extreme or out of touch or elite and so forth. So we have to identify people to be spokespeople that are not already branded in that way. We have to find folks, again, who can connect with people at a very one-to-one level to cut through the BS, for lack of a better term. I do think that digital platforms can help with this. And there have been, specifically with veterans, a lot of great organizations, yours included, that are helping to cut through that by having conversations, by meeting specifically with the veterans constituency to build trust, build relationships, and, help people evolve in their mindset. Now, social media is a tool for good or evil. And I do think that we need to show up on social spaces where a lot of these folks are. I know people, sometimes roll their eyes when, Biden makes a post on one of these, truth.com websites, whatever. But I do think him doing that is important because he's showing up in places where people don't expect you to. And you're not going to meet folks who disagree with you unless if you keep showing up in spaces where everyone is aligned. So you really have to get out of your comfort zone to reach people where they're at. And I do think that social media graphics can help share information. Candidly, a lot of folks, they don't read the news anymore. They get their information from a meme, from like a little graphic. So we have to also pump out our own graphics that are easy to share. And the last point I'll make is relationships do matter. I have MAGA folks in my family. I don't excommunicate them. I try to talk to them, right? I try to amplify like, hey, like, did you see like this fact check on something Trump said, right? Like sometimes you do it in jest, right? To make it, because I think humor is a really good way to comfort people, right? Versus people getting defensive. You try to make it maybe a little more friendly. But you have to be able to like cut through people's defensive mechanisms. And I think when we look at our own personal relationships, whether it's people we go to church with or temple with, or people that we see at the YMCA, right? Like I do think we have to kind of bring politics into all these places where people don't expect us. And then we can help change the conversation and hopefully change people's values.
That's very good advice. And that's the way we started the meeting. Talk to our friends and family. One thing, Anna, I think you'll be happy to know, we've had a policy with our group for the last several years. If we go into a public space, like an airport or a bar that's public, and Fox News is blaring, we ask the manager to turn it off. It's just disgusting to have to deal with some of that stuff. And sometimes they're willing to accommodate because nobody's ever asked them that before. And
absolutely,
what we do is try to do that very politely and make a request and say, why are you exposing us to this tripe? And that's what we're exposed to when if they're watching Fox News. We have to understand that's a propaganda outlet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And remind people of that and give them alternative sources of media. Like I'm a big NPR fan, I get most of my news from public radio. And I think, also providing folks an alternative source of information is another way to help shift the conversation. And, maybe folks have never listened to NPR before. They thought NPR was something that didn't relate to them. So send them an interesting article, maybe think about like what they care about. And it could be something as small as maybe they really care about animal rights, or they really care about clean, manatees. Like think about topics that don't feel very partisan and use that as like the olive branch to start the conversation.
Rich, do we have questions from online? Can you see those, Anna?
I see a few. Yeah. Let me grab a few. I won't be able to grab all of them because I have my phone is ringing. I got people I got to call back. So let me see. For Marshall, what can we do about our leaders, the AG in particular, from overriding petitions that have been signed by people for constitutional amendments, specifically the abortion issue? And I do want to give a quick update, on the Floridians Protecting Freedom constitutional ballot initiative, because it is going very well. Y'all heard it here first. I think we will collect all of our petitions before the month is over. Fingers crossed. Now, a part of that is very expensive. This campaign to get abortion access on the ballot in 2024 cost about $500,000 every single month. So it's a very expensive campaign right now. We've already raised $12 million. I'm not sure if folks know Barbara Dravecki, the former CEO of Planned Parenthood Southwest in Central Florida over in Sarasota. She's now the interim CEO. She's been a big part of this effort as well. So we're on the path. Now we are facing what's called Supreme Court review. So Ashley Moody, the Attorney General, has basically issued an opinion trying to say that the language in this ballot initiative is not specific enough. She's basically trying to toss it out from being in front of the voters. Today, Floridians Protecting Freedom, alongside several former Republican elected officials, actually submitted an amicus brief commenting back to, or I should say they submitted an opinion commenting back to the Attorney General defending the language. And I'm really grateful that we were able to find, several former Republican officials willing to do that, because it shows that this really is a bipartisan initiative, one that is common sense and one that will get 60% approval if we are able to get this on the ballot. So we're on the path. We are in this process right now. I do want folks to know that every Thursday at around 11 a.m., state Supreme Court's positions are announced, and we are waiting for a decision on Florida's 15-week abortion ban, because that will then in 30 days following, we will have the 6-week abortion ban go into effect. So I do want folks to be aware of that, as it is a pending decision that could come up pretty much, any time, any Thursday is when we expect to see it. So let me see if I can grab one more question. I see Tom with a question.
While you're
sorry.
looking at that, Anna, I'll make a comment. The one thing that we need to keep forefront in our mind too, Dr. Ruth Benjat mentioned this to us. This MAGA movement is taking away our freedoms.
Right.
And every American can relate to that. And the first example, and one of the best examples, is abortion. Why is the government interjecting its rules into our own medical decisions, our own freedoms? And then you can go right down the line from there. What books you can read, what you can talk about, where you can protest. That's their goal, is to take away our freedoms and put us under an authoritarian regime. Our fellow Americans need to understand that. Sorry for interrupting, Anna.
No, well said. Well said. And I'll probably just be able to grab, I see 2 more questions that that are top that I want to grab real quick. Then I got to hop off, unfortunately. Tom writes, Florida seems to nullify the values of human beings, of the environment, and of quality of life as it races to promote business profits, corporate power, and political ambition. Big Sugar is poisoning the Everglades and turn the Everglades, Okeechobee are feeding red tide on both coasts. The power lies with the money. How can we begin to turn this around? Are there organizations that you admire because they have the grit to not believe the party line and seek real change? So first of all, I really appreciate this question. I'm someone who does not take any money from the sugar industry. I don't take any money from utility companies, FPL and Duke included in that. I don't take any money from Mosaic, which is the phosphorus mining company that just passed a bill last session for radioactive roads. And of course, any company that busts unions, they don't give it to me anyways, but I wouldn't solicit their money. So you do need to really help support candidates that are willing to challenge corporate influence in government. And a part of that is, helping those candidates raise grassroots funds, because I run a corporate-free campaign, but I could not be in office if I didn't raise money. And my very first campaign was, I raised $523,000 from 4,000 donations. So this work does take resources, but you can support candidates who are willing to say no to these entities by helping them raise grassroots funds to run successful campaigns. The other part of this question is you really need to help break the political, shadow over this, right? Like, a lot of your favorite candidates take this money and they got to be called in. I'm a firm believer in calling people in before you call them out, especially folks who are aligned with you on values. But it's like, you can't just let this keep happening, because it really does erode democracy. I don't think our founders ever realized the role that money would play in government. And of course, the Citizens United decision has made a bad situation worse. But the more light we can shine on the corrosive nature of money in politics, the better. And I'll give you a few quick terrible examples. The anti-rooftop solar bill. It was an attempt to go after net metering. House Bill 741 2 sessions ago. This was a bill written by Florida Power and Light. The bill sponsors are both given $20,000 in political contributions to file and sponsor the bill. And we actually got the governor to veto it, which is pretty shocking, to get Governor DeSantis to veto anything. But even he knew how politically dangerous this legislation was. And one of the amendments that I filed on this bill was to change the name of the bill to the Florida People's Lose Act, which spells out FPL. And my point in doing that was to show people, like, this is an FPL bill, right? And my Republican colleagues were so upset at me. They begged me to withdraw that amendment. And I was like, I refuse, like, we have to highlight the corporate influence in this process, and you got to do it in creative ways. Radioactive roads. I mentioned this earlier. Multiple Democrats voted for that bill because they receive money from Mosaic. And you just have to be able to call that, again, call out the money in politics, call out the companies that are doing this. And then if you can, call in, your representatives who are doing it, and if they don't care, then call them out. But you have to have, we have to strip away the shadow and the veneer that this isn't a problem. I think that unfortunately campaign finance laws are so convoluted. Like if you were just do a Google search, like Mosaic Florida donations, you'll probably see federal candidate information because that's more available by Google search. But state campaign finances, you have to go through many layers. It is available online, but you have to click through it. It's not really something that pops up on a Google search. So I think part of it too is raising awareness about your elected officials. How much money do they take from these companies, and really make that more accessible to the greater public?
That's a very good point, Nana. I have to just say one thing about our group that we're so proud of. We started working to overturn the Supreme Court awful decision, probably one of the worst ones in history, Citizens United, and we awarded our Tom Paine Award to Miss Ronna Bazzini, who walked from Sarasota to Tallahassee to raise awareness about that problem. And Ronna's in the room tonight, and I'd like her to stand up and be recognized.
Awesome.
She's one of our heroes, Anna. And
that's awesome.
We've also been working hard against Mosaic. They're trying to extend their mining into DeSoto County, which threatens our water source. Here in Southwest Florida, there's millions of us.
Crazy. That's so crazy.
And they're trying to extend phosphate mining in the headwaters of the Peace River. And if they have a big catastrophe like they've had in the past, our water supply is shot. And
totally.
What happens to the economy then? And
100%.
So we're working on some of these issues, Anna, and we're right with you, and we work on them in a nonpartisan way. And we can move forward in this state, but it's not easy when we're fighting millions and millions of dollars by huge corporations.
Absolutely. And huge kudos to y'all's leadership on this. And the people are with us on these issues. The reason why corporations give so much money to politicians is because they're buying their silence. They're buying their consent. Because if you just poll, I have actually in my district, I have polled FPL. I'm curious, what are people's attitudes towards utility companies? And it's never positive. Same thing with insurance companies, right? Because at the end of the day, any entity, any corporation that takes your money, people don't have a good feeling about, right? And so these companies work really hard on their brand, and they work really hard to censor lawmakers and other decision makers from questioning them. And they do that through political contributions. So we need to call that out. We need to also amplify the shared opposition, which is very, very nonpartisan. This is an issue where you win support of people from all political backgrounds, because at the end of the day, it's a working class issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an issue for the future of Florida. Florida's environment, it transcends political persuasions. So huge kudos to y'all, and definitely keep up the really great work. And with that said, I do got to run. I got, unfortunately, some folks I got to call back. My phone is buzzing. But this was amazing. And just thank you so much for the space and for the time and for your leadership. And I do hope that I get the chance to be there in person one day. I know I've joined a few times on Zoom, but hopefully I can make it out there and be with y'all in person in the future.
We're eager for you to do that, Anna. And thank you so much, and keep up the hard work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all. Talk to you soon.
Just one comment to follow up with what Anna said is everybody knows in our group our priorities this last year, and they probably will be for next year, protecting our democracy and fighting climate change. And on the climate change front, we've got to remember one thing. Florida is the worst in the Southeast in solar, and the Southeast is the worst in the country. Now, what does that tell us about Florida? And why are we in that spot? Because of Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy, etc. Because they contribute to these politicians. Nikki Fried, what did she get? Campaign contributions from Florida Power and Light. So we have to stand up and we have to say that that's not going to go. You're not going to get into office. The people are not going to vote for you if you don't quit representing these corporations. We have to be more aggressive on those issues, in my opinion. So is there any other comments or questions from the floor? Skip, come up to the microphone, Skip.
I just wanted to let everyone know that Anna and I have been in conversation for about a year on email, and she is so terrific. I have taken most everything she's done and given it to the local Democratic Party as a guide. And she has just been a super, super person and a big flame in this state politically. And the second thing is, I didn't know till I was sitting here tonight that that the Mosaic got the right to put their stuff on the roads. And in the military, I'm a subject matter expert on C4ISR, if you know what that is. But we fly with airplanes and we look at things on the ground. And there's no way that that stuff in dust is not going to give people cancer. So I'm absolutely amazed that they got that through.
Thanks, Skip, for those comments. And to bring you up to date, as far as I know, right now, that stuff is still piled in stacks. There's about 25 of them around the state. Some of them as high as 200, 250 feet high. There's 40 billion tons of this waste, hazardous waste. And something has to be done with it. And the solution historically has been to just pile it up and leave it there. But the problem with that is it breaks through into the groundwater. Phosphate mining needs to be stopped, folks. It's a threat to all of us. So are there any other comments? Philippe?
I want to make a comment on cultural war issues related to current developments. The Sarasota County Commission is going to consider the question of whether or not to stop paying $4,000 a year in dues to the American Library Association. And this is a prelude to start banning books out of our school libraries and our public libraries. And the model is what has happened last week in Collier County, which is Naples. They have banned 330 books from the high school libraries. Now, you may have heard about some of these books, like A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, everything that Toni Morrison has ever written down the line. These are the books that were the classics we studied in AP classes or whatever. I mean, Farewell to Arms, one of the first grade books I ever read. So it is amazing what these people are trying to do, and it's got to be better known. I mean, I don't know what parents today know about A Farewell to Arms and all the rest of that. Yes, there's one tomorrow in Venice, and there'll be one in Sarasota at the end of the month. So I'm going to try to attend or whatever, but this is absolutely outlandish. I mean, to literally ban some of the very best books of the last century. That's where we are.
That's an excellent point, Philippe. And that just brings home what we're facing. Our freedoms are under threat. MAGA wants to take away our freedoms. They want to take away our right to read. And so we have to take action on that. So are there any other comments or questions?
I just want to say if you weren't able to attend or watch on YouTube Saturday night, the talk by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the video is, you can go to the Florida Veterans for Common Sense website And I'll just give you two ways to watch the video. One is floridaveteransforcommonsense.org/video. And I usually try to keep up with the most current videos that we have there. You can always look there. And also directly on YouTube, I know this is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's tinyurl.com/fascism at our doorstep, which was the title of her talk. Or you can go to the Unitarian Universalist YouTube channel, and they've got it there as well. But if you go there, skip the first 10 minutes of dead time.
Thanks, Rick. So that just reinforces that this video is very easy to find. And so find it through our website. And remember the assignment when we started out tonight? That's got to go to 5 friends. That's one of the best talks about the threat from this fascist movement that you can find any place. Professor Ben-Ghiat really knows her stuff from top to bottom. And when she has a checklist and she's seeing the checklist being marked off, it's dangerous times. So unless there's any further comments or questions from the floor, the meeting is hereby adjourned.